How's it going, and welcome back to their Marvel Snap video. Yesterday, we talked about the top 5 cards I'd like to see brought down in power level a little bit with nerfs for the sake of format balance. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that's a little bit more fun. 10 cards I would like to see buffed in Marvel Snap to potentially make these cards that don't currently see any play be a bit better. Let's dive on in with the first card here, which is a card we're all familiar with, but maybe have forgotten about, a starter card in Punisher. So this is currently a 3 energy card that can scale upwards to 6 points of attack, but the opponent gets to see this play out early typically, and they can dictate how much power the Punisher is going to have in a given game, generally limiting him to 4 or 5 unless it's advantageous for them to give him more. I honestly think Punisher could probably just be a 2 energy card with his current attack and ongoing effect. Even if he gets all the way up to 6, that would still be smaller than something like Angela, and he'll frequently be 4 or 5 in most games, which puts him properly in line with cards like Mysterio and Lizard that are other potent 2-drops currently in the game. The next early game card I'd like to see get a buff is Rhino. Rhino basically suffers from what I like to refer to as third best option syndrome. Scarlet Witch has the same attack as Rhino with a little bit more variance but costs 1 less energy. Storm has 1 less attack than Rhino, but in addition to wiping out a troublesome location, she also floods it, giving you utility in other ways. I think I'd like to see Rhino just get a small stat increase. He's a big lad that's smashing things. He deserves at least a 4th point of attack. I think if he got that, he would be a very reasonable consideration for location interaction, in addition to Scarlet Witch and Storm that are both much more popular than him now. Up next, we have a card that everybody kind of experiments with in their decks in a little bit in the early game, but eventually realizes there's just not enough reward for the risk that this card presents. Because your deck in Marvel Snap is so small, you're frequently going to draw your copy of Angel before you blow him up. And while I like this style of effect, I think I would like a little bit more reward for the risk associated with having to draw a 1 energy 2 power card in the mid to late game. I think a sweet design for this could perhaps be when one of your cards is destroyed, this flies out of your deck and doubles its power. It means if you do run well and trigger and get this out early, you're rewarded with a 4 power card that's more likely to be impactful, but you still have that detrimental draw in the mid game if you're not successfully able to blow something up before Angel finds his way into your hand. Up next, we have a Pool 2 card that's gone through a few iteration over Marvel Snap's closed beta to now lifetime. Nakia originally gave everything in your hand +2 attack. Then she gave 2 cards at random +2 attack. Now she gives the left 2 most cards in your hand +2 attack. And honestly, I think we could probably just put her back to her original text from the closed beta. I think the cards that kind of pushed her to get nerfed, things like Strong Guy and others, saw adjustments of their own. And I think Nakia, seeing the least amount of play of all of those, could probably be brought back up to original power level without warping the format at all. Moving into Pool 3 cards, I'd like to see some adjustments too. First up, we have Quake, a kind of unique, neat effect here. On reveal, if this is played at the middle location, swap the positions of every location. I think this only trigger in the middle for Quake was intended to be flexibility for the person playing it, but in reality, it just kind of tends to end up being awkward. You often want to play your 2-drop at a certain slot, often having to choose between poor positioning for your Quake and actually getting use out of her effect. I think if they don't want the effect to trigger at all locations, they like that control. We can also just see Quake get an extra stat boost. She's a powerful member of the mutants. Let's just give her a 4th point of power. Speaking of powerful mutants, up next we have Gambit, who I think is pretty close to being a reasonable card, but really he suffers from just the current metagame in which he's being played. There's a lot of copies of Colossus and Armor and Professor X in the Destroyer ridden metagame that we're currently playing in, and honestly, I'd like to see Gambit simply change to not include cards he can't actually destroy and the things he chooses as target from randomly. So, if there's a Colossus and 2 other cards on the board, he would just be 50-50 to destroy between the 2 cards he can actually destroy, instead of occasionally discarding a card and throwing it at something that just doesn't blow up because it has protection built in. Up next, we have a 4-drop in Crossbones, so you can only play this card at locations where you're winning. Crossbone, generally speaking, just gets outclassed by Jessica Jones. She's a card that provides the same amount of stats as him with a much less intensive restriction. I think I'd like to see Crossbones just kicked up to 9 points of power. With Rescue, we have the precedent for 4-drops having 9 points of power if they come with some kind of drawback, and I don't think Crossbones would be overbearing if he was added to that club. After Crossbones, we have a card that really doesn't see any play at all. Black Bolt saw some play during one of the metas in the closed beta where playing Nova on the 6th turn of the game was really powerful, and perhaps it could be good if something like that came up again, but that feels very narrow and specific, and I honestly think this card in its current iteration probably doesn't see any play without changes. You could adjust its cost, you could adjust its power, you could change how it controls what it discards, or maybe you discard all the cards at the lowest cost. There's a lot of range of stuff you can do here to potentially push this card into relevancy. Speaking of cards that desperately need to be pushed into relevancy, they did the Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. dirty. Nick Fury, one of the kind of weakest cards in the game currently. 5 energy, only 7 stats, and generating 3 6-drops at random. Well, if you wanted a 6-drop, you probably put it inside of your deck to begin with. He generally gives you stuff you're not going to use. I think there's a few ways you could change this card. I think bringing its energy and power down to bring it in line with White Queen as a 4 energy, 6 power card is probably a reasonable place to start. But I think you could massage its unreveal ability a little bit too, rather than giving you 3 6-drops, for example. If Nick gave us a 5 and a 6 to potentially allow you to have this 4-drop that lets you curve out for the rest of the game, albeit randomly, seems like a unique and powerful effect that would be worth playing. Now, finally, I saved the best for last, and I think this one is going to be contentious, but hear me out before you start pounding away vigorously in the comment section. A card I would like to see adjusted is Heimdall. I know a lot of players that are in Pool 2 complain a lot about the movement deck, but as you move your way into Pool 3 and you get better at the game, the movement deck falls off hard. And it falls off hard for 2 reasons. One of those reasons is the numbers on all of the cards in that archetype overall aren't quite as big as some of the other things like Destroyer in the format. And the other is that Heimdall is just an incredibly predictable top-end finisher. Your better opponents are going to retreat when they know they're beat by a Heimdall, and more importantly, they're going to know when they're not beat by Heimdall, and they're gonna take your cubes. The change I would love to see to Heimdall would be something similar to Quake, in that where you play Heimdall out dictates the direction in which he slides your board. I think it would be sweet if Heimdall said, when you play me to the left, your cards slide to the right. When you play me to the right, your cards slide to the left. When you play me in the middle, I don't know, I'm not the game designer, figure something out. But I would like it if Heimdall gave you some agency over which way you pushed your cards, to give you some flexibility in that end game, so that way you're not always locked out when going to the left isn't good for you. At any rate, what'd you think of my suggestions here? Do you agree that these cards could use some love? Is there something you think I missed that could use a buff? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, remember, if you enjoyed my suggestions, to tap that like button. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. I post Marvel Snap game theory stuff like this, as well as deck highlights here 7 days a week, and you wouldn't want to miss anything. As always, I appreciate the people that watched all the way through to this end of the video. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you back again real soon.